Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkins, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkins, your host, and today I have with me Mr. Kevin Palmieri, and this guy is doing so many things. I am going to let him tell you all the different things that they are doing, but making a huge impact, and just so excited to have you here, Kevin. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, as of today, I am the CFO, the founder and the host of Next Level University. We're a global top 100 podcast with 1,400-ish episodes as of today. And then underneath that, we do many other things like coaching and all of that happy jazz, to your point, just to add more value to our community and our audience.
So awesome. And I'm sure we'll get into more of exactly all the different areas of what you do. You know, you run this podcast and you do all the things, and you remind me of myself because I try to do all the things too.
we try. It's definitely humbling and it's challenging, but it keeps you humble. And I think that's important, right?
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I think just as I like to stay engaged and busy and doing things, it's just the main thing is staying focused on getting the right things done for me anyway.
Yes. Same. There's a lot of things to do, but there's usually one right thing to do at the right time. So I very much resonate with that.
Yes. So Kevin, I'm so happy to have you here. If you want to just kind of jump right in, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and kind of where you come from. What's pushed you into doing what you're doing?
Yeah, so I usually start with my story very early. So I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad I didn't meet him until I was 27. So I didn't really have any relationship with my father. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know what he did for a job. At times in my life, I didn't even know if he was still alive. So obviously that has shaped me in many ways, positive and potentially negative ways. Other than that, childhood, pretty normal, all things considered. In high school is when life really started to kind of pivot for me, because all of my friends were talking about going to college. And I knew I didn't want to go to college. It didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought, I'm not going to pay $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year to try to figure out what I want to do. So I went down to the local gas station that was in my town, and I got a job. And that was my first quote unquote real job as a young man. And from there, I did a bunch of different jobs, whatever I could do to pay the bills, because I was just trying to figure out my life. So over the next, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I went from the gas station to cleaning toilets at a hospital, floors, toilets, rooms. That then I was a personal trainer. Then I was a truck driver. I was a forklift operator. I was in construction. And I think I ended up doing like 1 or 2 other things. But when I was in my early 20s, I ended up getting this very unique job opportunity in an industry called weatherization. So we would go into buildings, and it was our job to make them more energy efficient. So I quite literally went from making maybe $15 an hour as a construction contractor to $60 an hour on my first job for this weatherization company. And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, I found the thing. Not going to college was the right play. I just found my dream job. I'm going to do this forever. So if you looked at me a couple of years after that, I was 25. I had the body of my dreams. I just won a bodybuilding show. My girlfriend was a model. I had a high-paying job. I had a sports car. I had all the things. But internally, I was very insecure. I was very uncertain. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was not a confident man. So one day, my girlfriend left me, because I was a shell of myself. I wasn't pouring into her cup because I was barely able to keep my cup filled. And when she left me, I convinced myself that I had to make more money, because more money will fix more of my problems. So I grinded my face off for the next 10 months living on the road, because most of our jobs were in other states. And I got to the end of that year and I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. And I had this very interesting moment when I cracked my final pay stub where I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. And definitely that year, I was very unconscious that year. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I did what any young man would do. I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And that's where all of this started for me. And it's interesting, Amber, because I fell in love with the podcast as I knew instantly I didn't want to do this job anymore. I've already reached the pinnacle. I've reached the top. I don't want to do what it takes to get there again, but I don't know what else I'm going to do. So the next year starts, and it was busier than the previous year, but I'm just out of it. So every time I'm packing my bag to get in the van and drive 6 hours to a job site, it's just sucking the life out of me. So I kept doing it because I had to pay the bills, but I would call out, I would leave the job site early, I'd show up late. I just was not a good employee. And eventually I was 6 hours away from where I lived in a hotel room in New Jersey. My alarm clock went off at 5:15, 5:30 in the morning. I sat up, slid to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots, as I have done 1,000 times at this point. But that morning, it was different. It was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one is on a different station. And one is saying, you're stuck here forever. People like you do not get jobs like this. Never mind, leave them behind. If you do work up the courage to leave, what are your friends going to think? You make more money than all of your friends. There's a lot of significance there. What's your family going to think? You make more money than anybody in your family. That's a lot of significance and a lot of pride and a lot of reputation. Mm-hmm. And the big question, what are you going to do? If you leave this job, what's next? Like, what are we going to do? And in that moment, I thought to myself, if I take my life, I take my problems with me. And here I am 6 hours away from anybody who cares about me in a crusty hotel room, just not feeling good, having these really dark thoughts. Luckily, I have a wonderful friend who's my business partner now, who I reached out to. And I explained to him, hey, I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these feelings. I don't know what to do. Am I broken? I don't know what's going on. And he said many things, but one of the things he said was, Kev, over the last couple of years, your awareness has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later and becoming a full-time, I wouldn't even classify myself as an entrepreneur at the time because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't have any business stuff going on. But I left my job to pursue the podcast thing full time. And that was in 2018. So almost 6 years ago as of today.
Wow. So I have so many questions, but the question here, like this, I want you to speak a little bit more to this effect, suicidal thoughts from someone who is very successful. And I think in our culture, we see these things happen sometimes, and it's hard to understand because with someone's life, if they've gone down this downward spiral and their life is a wreck and they really have nothing to live for, it's not like for someone who's never struggled with suicidal ideations or anything, they maybe can't understand. They can at least understand that versus someone being super successful and having it all. Yeah. But can you speak a little bit to that, like your experience, elaborate a little more on that for us?
Yeah, I think two thoughts I have around that. One, success is subjective, right? It might have sounded like I had a lot of success and I thought that's what success was, but success is very, very, very subjective. And I'm realizing that now more than ever. So that's just one thought process around it. But what I really think happened was I grew up in a household where I didn't have a lot of money, right? We'd routinely talk about how we were going to pay rent. The not having my father around thing created a massive insecurity of not being good enough, not being smart enough, not being enough, really, just not being enough in general. I never faced any of that. So here I am later in life, and I'm trying to take external things to fix internal voids. So the new car, I remember I went to the dealership, and the car, there was literally people standing around my car looking at it like, wow, that's such a nice car. And I got in and left. And it's like, I expected that to fix insecurity. I expected that to fix trauma. I expected that to fix triggers. Didn't do any of it. So what happened was I thought I was finding the keys to unlocking the inner stuff that would fix the voids. Every time I found a new key and put it in the slot and turned it, nothing happened. So I think what happened really, Amber, for me was I assumed cracking 6 figures. For some reason, we picked that number. I assumed cracking that figure would make all my problems go away. I thought that was the key. That was just the one I couldn't get for the longest. And I think it kind of broke me when I realized that ain't it either. Then it's back to the drawing board of I don't know what to do. I've tried everything. At this point I'd already been to therapy. I had tried that before. It didn't really seem to do much in this moment. So I think for me it was the understanding that trying to take external success to fix internal voids. I think that's why many people have mental health issues. You see somebody who's a world famous actor, actress, musician, comedian, and you wonder, how does that happen? Well, there's a lot of chemical things going on and a lot of mental things going on. But oftentimes, I think people assume a certain level of success will make them feel a certain way internally. And honestly, I think if anything, it highlights the insecurities that you have if you don't go internal first. So yeah, that really is the best way I could explain it.
It's almost as if you're chasing after something and you find out that journey is not purposeful.
If you optimize for fulfillment, you'll end up with a happy life. So before, I was optimizing for happiness, which was results based. If I get the car, I will be happy internally. If I get the model girlfriend, I will be happy internally. This is always the analogy I use. If this episode goes well and you like me, I will be happy. I'll enjoy that. That'll feel good. That'll be like a little ego hit for me. Wow, Amber and I are friends now. We had a great interview. Regardless of the outcome of this, I am fulfilled in the process of doing it. Because this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm on purpose. I am on the mission. I'm adding value. I think fulfillment is a really good measure for what we should be doing. I went to the gym today. I crushed a workout. I wasn't happy getting up and going, but I did know I'd be fulfilled and I'd be grateful after I did it. That has been a really interesting shift for me because a lot of the stuff we do, it kind of looks like we're losing. But we're very fulfilled in the process of doing it. And when you're fulfilled at doing something, you'll do it a lot longer than somebody else. The thought I have is I always consider it like a pool. Many people jump into a pool. They convince themselves that they're passionate about the thing that is just profitable. They say, you know what? Yeah, this is going to make me a lot of money. I'm going to convince myself I'm passionate about it. It's kind of a giveaway when they jump in the pool, they dive to the bottom to get the rings, and they come out of the pool as quickly as humanly possible. That's not fulfillment. You're looking for happiness. I fell in the pool of podcasting and I figured out how to swim because I love it so much. I don't want to leave. I just want to stay here because it's super fulfilling. That's why we've been able to get to the level we have. So long answer short, I think the thing to optimize for is fulfillment, because fulfillment can help you avoid regret. It can help you stay within your core values and your core beliefs, and it's sustainable. Happiness is not sustainable. It's fleeting. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. Fulfillment is something that when you find it, you can really hang on to it and you can compound it over time.
Yeah, that's really good. I was thinking, even when I asked the question, that purpose, I think that people can get a whole lot further with purpose, because if we're not doing the things that really motivate us and we don't have a reason why we're not doing the things, sometimes it's like a hamster on a wheel, just spinning our wheels doing. But I love the way you described it. It's so much better. It's almost like you have to enjoy the process of getting to where you're going and knowing that you are working towards something bigger, something greater, and finding fulfillment. So fulfillment and purpose, I think, are very awesome words to really describe getting where we're going and being happy in doing so and finding that purpose behind life.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people really lack, is being able to find that purpose. And because you hear these stories of people, and it's like they have it all. How could they be depressed? And our community recently suffered the loss of someone to suicide, and it was devastating. It's devastating. So how do you think someone like you and I who are doing podcasting and you're doing so much more. I mean, I have a project and stuff behind what I'm doing. How can we reach the people that are struggling in this area? Do you have ideas about that?
Yeah, it is such a challenge. It is such a challenge because most people aren't going to self-identify as I need help. I wouldn't have to most people. I reached out to the person I felt the safest with, and I knew he wouldn't judge me, and that was good enough for me. This is my thought process. I had somebody actually reach out to me today. It's interesting that we're talking about this. And she said, I consume all your stuff on Facebook and I love you guys and you've always been so nice to me and so kind. Do you mind if I vent to you? And I was like, no, of course not. I said, full disclosure, it might take me some time to get back to because I have a lot of messages and I have a lot of things going on, but you're always, and I use this word, you're always safe to vent with me. I can't promise I'll send you a 10-minute audio back, but I'll do my best to make sure I'm adding value to the situation. Would that person ever have reached out to me in a negative time if I wasn't there during the positive times? I don't know. Probably not. I wouldn't have, right? So that's why this is such a challenge, is it almost goes from positive to negative. And if there's nobody there when you're positive, it's going to be really hard to trust in reaching out to somebody when you're negative. So I would say that it's almost like you got to plant the seeds of vulnerability and safety with people long before you need to harvest the crop, which is the relationship and asking. My business partner and I were best friends at the time. It just made sense to reach out to him. I knew he'd be able to offer me a different perspective. And that's really all I was looking for in that moment. But there's a long list of people I wouldn't have reached out to. I'm just very blessed that I had him. So I think it goes to the community. Who are the pillars of your community that you'd actually feel comfortable reaching out to? Because usually it's not, I won't say usually, sometimes it's not family. Just because we're supposed to be super close and super trusting of people doesn't mean we are. Just circumstances shift. So yeah, I would say we almost have to treat it like it is something that may happen eventually, but if we can look long before it actually happens and put those things proactively in place, I think we'd be in a better situation. I don't know exactly how to do that. I think it's just checking up on people. I send messages all the time to people. Hey, Amber, I hope you're well. I hope you're well. If I send enough of those, maybe eventually when you're not well, you'll tell me. And from there, maybe we can have a conversation or I can guide you or lead you to somebody who can help you. I think that's the best answer I could give.
Mm-hmm. Does your coaching specifically is it business coaching or is it like kind of a holistic approach to lifestyle in general?
This is where things get a little complicated because, like you said, we're doing a lot. So yeah, we do business coaching because we're a business and we've grown and scaled. And so we're doing that. But the majority of our audience is looking more for mindset, relationships, early financial advice. They're looking for accountability. They're looking for necessity. So a lot of what we do is that. It's very mindset, but with tactics is a lot of what we do. My business partner does a lot of business coaching. I do a lot of podcast coaching. So there's a lot going on there, but it's usually, just as an example, I had a podcast client the other day, and he said, I don't know, I cannot promote my podcast to save my life. And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. Right. I'm not going to give you 15 tactics. Let's actually dig. And I said, what else have you created in the past that you haven't promoted? And he said, a book. And I said, you created a book? He said, yeah. And I said, where is it? On Amazon. How are your sales? He's like, I don't know. I've never talked about it. I've never promoted it. I won't even tell people I have a book. So we dug and we dug and we dug. And I said, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? And eventually we got to the place where I said, can I just throw something out there real quick? And he said, yeah. Awesome human, just a great human being. I said, were you raised in a culture and or household that had negativity towards you being loud or putting yourself out there? A lot of judgment from the people closest to you. And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, that's it. That's it. That's what this is. It's not that you don't have time to post on social. It's not that you don't have time to talk about your book. You're so afraid of judgment that you'll never talk about the stuff that means the most to you because that's what hurts the most too. We got to work through that. So what comes as a podcast client who wants to learn more about posting on social media ends up being a very deep conversation around the fact that you have some stuff from your childhood that's showing up today. You just probably don't realize it. That's a good example of the conversations we have on the podcast as well as coaching.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so deep. And I can identify with that because I've recently had to come to this place in my life where I've had to do the same thing. Like continue. Have you heard this process about how you can continuously ask why? Why? Well, why am I not promoting this? Okay, well, why? Until you get to the bottom of why you're actually not doing something. And I found, I can't speak to everyone. I've definitely not analyzed this in multiple people, but I've analyzed it myself. And it does come down to fear. It does come down to being scared. And for me, there was a lack of where I always wanted to find validation. I always was looking for validation. And there was a fear that if I put something out there and it doesn't do well, then I'm not validated. And it's, I don't know, the older I get, the more I'm just like, not everything you put out there is necessarily going to be phenomenal, but you're going to miss so many of the great things if you don't put yourself out there. Yeah. So I think it's awesome that you coach people through that, because that is, we can put a Band-Aid on the surface of problems that we have, but at the end of the day, there's a deeper reason for these things. Always. And I think that what you're doing is awesome because you're helping people through this.
I appreciate it.
So with your podcast, is this more like business advice, or it also ties into mindset advice as well?
It's level up your life, love, health, and wealth. So we talk, it's that. Yeah, it's that. It's not really, I mean, we're not going to talk about like building an email list. That's not our jam for the podcast, but it's really, we have found that our audience tends to be lower on self-belief and lower on self-worth, struggles with relationships. So oftentimes are taken advantage of by people because of their low self-worth. At the end of the day, Amber, this has been the most interesting thing we've realized. Most problems I've seen, they stem from low self-belief or low self-worth. Those are, or let's do this, inaccurate self-belief or inaccurate self-worth. Because believe it or not, you can have too much self-belief and you can have too much self-worth, depending on where you are in life and what you're aspiring to. I know that might sound wonky, but I've seen it happen. That's really been the biggest thing. Is I struggled with self-belief and I struggled with self-worth. A lot of the advice I would hear from people never landed because they have 10 out of 10 self-belief. They don't know what it's like not to believe in themselves, and they're trying to get me to do stuff. That's when I started to realize, oh, interesting. I have a lot in common with our community. So that's really been a very, very important thing. And that's for the audience out there as well. And even that client I was talking about, he has more belief in himself than he thinks. He has self-worth issues that he doesn't realize yet. That's a very, very unique juggling act to figure out just as a human being. We all deal with most likely one of the two.
Do your people that you coach, did they know your background and they know where you came from, that you were at one point struggling with suicidal thoughts?
Yeah. That's something that's very important for our brand, because couple thoughts. One, I don't want anybody to think I have it all figured out or I ever had it all figured out. And I want to be relatable to people, because if you're not relatable to people, it's very hard to help them. It's very hard to be trusted. It's very hard for somebody to say, well, I can imagine what it's like to be in that position. So yeah, that's part of my story. And then my business partner, his dad passed away in a car accident when he was only 2. So he didn't know his father either. And that's connected us in the way it has. And we're very focused on being very, very level-headed men. I don't want to be a toxic masculine person that's just not it. That's not it for me. That's not how I help people. That's not what we're here to do. Our experiences have shaped us into the people we are today, and that's why we communicate the way we do. So it's very important that we share that, because I want people to know who I really am. Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree with you there. You have to be authentic. And this was something I came face to face with last year, was just like, if you're not authentic, people can't relate to you. Mm-hmm. And it puts you in a whole nother area. And my belief in this life is like, what can I do to be purpose driven? What can I do to make my life here count? Because if not, what's it all for? You know, just an existence. So what, if you ask yourself this question, what can I do to make my life count? It's like you come face to face with this answer and it suddenly puts things into perspective. I feel like where now putting myself out there and showing myself in a real authentic way is the benefit of the greater good. So what if I'm ridiculed or criticized or not validated or, whatever it comes down to it, if I'm not fulfilled in that particular thing, there's people that we still need to help. There's people that still need us. I try to tell people all the time, like, I heard this and I a couple of years ago, I think it's really awesome because there's people that can only really relate to you. Like you're an individual, I'm an individual, and there's individual people that are in places where you and I were years ago when you were, struggling with these suicidal ideations. I also struggled with that at one point in my life. And there's people there now. And it's like, but if we don't talk about these things, how can we help people?
Yeah.
So I think it's awesome when you run across someone like yourself, a business like yourself that comes out and says, I'm just going to be frank. Like I was there. I know what it feels like.
I think the other thing too that's interesting is I've just done this so many times that what's vulnerable for me is not, or what's vulnerable for somebody else might not be vulnerable for me. A lot of times people say, do you mind talking about that stuff? And it's like, of course. Yeah, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to talk about the stuff that's real because I think that's the way I can add value. Yeah, I can give you analogies and I can tell you stories all day, but the messenger is as important, if not more important than the message. The messenger is the person that you look at and say, you know what, I'm ready to listen to this now. Or, wow, I now I can understand that at a deeper level. So yeah, I think it's everything. But in the beginning, it was a challenge. In the beginning, sharing certain stuff was a challenge. But here's the belief I always had. I always believed it would be worth it. I always believed there might be somebody out there who needs to know that I struggled with a porn addiction, that needs to know that I grew up without a father, that needs to know that I don't believe in myself a lot of the time. I always believed there was one person who needed it. But I also had an understanding that for every kiss on one cheek, I might get a punch on the other. I've thought about that since the very beginning of this. It's unfortunate, and it is a potential downside, but you have to believe more in the mission than the unfortunate byproducts that come with it.
If you had to give someone advice on, like, say someone is not in that depths of despair, but they're more like just kind of in that area of, I just don't really want to share. I got a lot of stuff that I'm not really comfortable with sharing, but I know that my story could truly help someone. What would you tell someone under those circumstances?
I would probably say, okay, next time you have the opportunity, and this is going to be a challenge, but next time you have the opportunity to reveal parts of yourself, start doing it as if your experience has happened to somebody else. So you don't even have to come out and say, well, yeah, no, I know what that's like. That happened to me, blank, blank, blank. You could say, well, I can imagine what that's like. I actually had a friend who went through blank, 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 blank. And here's the thing. See the response you get. If somebody says to you, oh my goodness, your friend is so brave. I can't believe they overcame that. And now they're talking about it. Interesting. Okay, maybe that's a little positive reinforcement. If somebody says, wow, your friend is insert negative connotation here, maybe two thoughts. Maybe one, it's not time for you to share that yet. Two, you have to vet the people you share it with more. Because you could share the best celebration with somebody and they might still find a way to be negative, or you can share something super negative with somebody and they might find a way to flip it positive, depending on the person. I don't know where I heard this. I didn't come up with this quote, but somebody said you have to make sure when you're sharing things, you're sharing scars, not open wounds. And that's the best analogy for this, I think, because if you just went through a divorce, the last thing you should be doing is talking about your emotions around the divorce if it's still fresh and you're still dealing with it and you're still having those moments. But if it happened 15 years ago and it was the launching pad for all of your success and fulfillment now, it would probably be valuable to talk about it as long as it's safe for you to do it. So yeah, maybe a little role playing would probably be a good way to to test out the waters without diving all the way in.
Mm-hmm. That is so good. I often wonder this myself because, my whole vision, even behind the podcast, before my podcast was in existence, I was helping people share their stories, and specifically stories of trauma through art, through photography, through videography. And it's so true because I try to tell people, like, if you're not ready, you're not ready. And some stories they still hold energy, like they still have a charge in us. And if we're not at that place yet, we can't really share. But
Yeah.
I love what you just said, that start with little parts and kind of test the waters. It's like sticking your toe in the water.
Yeah.
You're seeing how cold it is, right? So I think that's awesome. And I also love that you said sometimes our stories are not for every person. And this was something I also had to get to the place with, sharing my story and my past. It was like, this is not for all ears. This is for a certain few. But you have to, I do believe that it's so important. And I love that you're sharing, and I love that you're encouraging people to share, because I believe there's healing in sharing. There's something that happens. It's a switch in our brains that once we release that, and I've seen this in clients as I've helped them share, like once you release that, it has no more weight on you, has no more hold over you.
Yeah.
So then you're free to move.
I think that's really the case with many insecurities. And I think many of us have insecurities around our story. One of my biggest insecurities is being short. I'm 5'4". It's really good if you're a bodybuilder. It helps, right? Being short tends to help. But that's something I absolutely hated. And when I started talking about it, it was like, well, you know what? It's not that bad. I mean, at least it's out there, and at least I can talk about it, and people around me know it's an insecurity. Now, but again, is somebody going to comment something? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But I also understand now, if you're taking the time out to be negative, you're probably not very fulfilled. And I can have empathy for that. I can completely have empathy for that, because I've been there. Trust me, I know. So I think it really is the interesting thing about sharing and your story and being vulnerable is when you share your story and you're vulnerable, you can create the opportunity for the coping mechanisms that come with it. You can get feedback and say, that kind of sucked. And then you can say, okay, well, what do I do about that? Or, oh, wow, that was amazing. Okay, now what do I? It's that weird thing where if you never share, you don't know what it's like to share, and you don't know the positives or negatives that come from it. There will be positives. I'm certain of it. There will be potential negatives. It most likely will happen. The sooner you get both sides of the coin, the sooner you know how you respond, and then you can kind of go from there. When people comment negative stuff, I want to physically fight them. That's my initial thought. That's the first thing that comes up. But over time, I've lost minutes, hours, days of my life thinking more about what other people think, when then I could say, you know what? What is going on with them that would make them do this? Interesting. Okay, let me dig. And then you can hopefully find a place of empathy. Again, I don't go there first. I usually get triggered, but understanding the trigger is, that's part of the human experience, right? And there's a million ways to get triggered, and there's a million things that are going to trigger us. So just understanding how you respond is always going to be a valuable thing to know about yourself.
Yeah. And then just also knowing that you as an individual, I as an individual, like, you're not for every person. So you have those that are kind of assigned to you to help, just as there's people assigned to help you through your journey. And I'm saying you're speaking in general, but I think that when we get to the place of understanding that, you know what, I'm not for everybody. Some people will listen to my podcast, listen to me talk, and be like, I hate everything about her. I don't like what she's doing, whatever. And I have to be comfortable with that. I have to be okay with that. And no, doesn't matter. If I'm not for everybody, that's okay. And if everybody's not for me, and that's okay.
Yep.
Let's find the people that we align with, find the people that we can build and grow and do the things that are important and impactful and purposeful in our life, and let the rest, let them find their people that they align with. So I think it changes the perspective when you start to look at it like that. tell me real quick about the journey for you. So going from having suicidal thoughts, digging yourself kind of in this hole of finding unfulfillment, you get to a place where you put a mirror in front of your face and you're like, I don't like life. I don't like myself. There's a turning point, an epiphany moment per se. And then there's a journey that happens. Can you speak to that? Like, was this an overnight thing? Was
Nope.
this? I already knew the answer to that.
I know. It was rhetorical. It's very interesting for me, Amber, because one of the questions I get asked very, very often is, what have you done for your mental health? Like, now you have a business and you talk about this all the time and you help people with this. When I left my job, my mental health got infinitely better. Infinitely. I can't even describe to you what it was like knowing I didn't have to get in a van and drive 6 hours and stay in a hotel. And it was amazing. But my anxiety, so my depression got drastically better. My anxiety got drastically worse because I didn't know this at the time. I was living so far outside of my comfort zone. People tell you to live outside your comfort zone. I'll tell you the same thing. But what I would say is make sure you're not living in your anxiety zone. All right. There's a zone between comfort and anxiety. It's learning. I was not living in the learning zone. So what happened in the very beginning was I started to track habits and try to make sure I was learning the right amount and understanding myself at a deeper level and figuring out this business thing. We worked really, really hard on our character. We didn't really focus on making money for the first 2 years. It was, how do I become a better man? How do I become a better communicator? How do I become more inclusive? How do I knock off as much of the toxic junk as humanly possible? Right. I wasn't a bad person, but I just didn't understand. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I wasn't as character driven as I wanted to be. So that was the very beginning. And then I think the big through line of it was I just tried to learn as much about myself as humanly possible. Just hyper conscious. I mean, that was the name of the podcast in the beginning, acutely aware. I don't want to live unconsciously. I don't want to live asleep. I want to know, why do I feel super comfortable with Amber? Why do I not feel super comfortable with this person? Why do I get triggered around this person? Why do I trigger this person? That has been 99% of the journey, is having deep conversations like this on microphones, but also behind the scenes. And then figuring out, where are my insecurities, right? Being around people that were a lot smarter than me. That was a challenge, especially as a podcast host interviewing these people. So, okay, why do I get insecure? Okay, what do I do about that? The vast majority of this journey has been internal for me. Now, transparently, we have worked every single day for the last 6 years to get to where we are today. And it has been the hardest thing, bar none. Going back to having suicidal ideations in the hotel room, most of the stuff we've done after that has been way, way, way harder than any of the pressure I was under then. Building a business, building a team, all that stuff. But it's really been a journey of, what is fulfillment? What are my core values? What are my core beliefs? What are my core aspirations? And how do I align my life with those things? And really, that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's what we do every day. If I feel myself burning out, usually it's because one of my core values, one of my core beliefs are not being met. It's not working the way it should. I want to spend more time with my wife, whatever it may be. So yeah, it has really been a giant journey of self-discovery and trying to figure everything out about myself, because when I learn more about me, everything else starts to make sense as well. And that's it in a nutshell. Hyperconscious. When you name your podcast Hyperconscious, you gotta learn about yourself.
Yeah. And life is that way. I mean, really, I tell people, I'm like, you have to have first an awareness that you're flawed. We all are. We're human, we're all flawed in some area. And the goal is to get better. And you coming out of the bodybuilding industry, because I come out of the fitness industry as well. And there's this saying, it's me versus me. You've heard this. So when people go out on a competition, they're like, I want to be a better package than I was last show. So to me, this is life. This is how can I strive every single day to be better against myself? I'm not competing with Kevin. I'm not competing with, the next person. I'm competing with how am I growing as a person? And I think the first step is being aware. And the second step is not being scared to dig into those places, because that's a scary place, I think, for some people.
Definitely.
To dig into the why they're doing
Definitely.
things. But it's so much more fulfilling if they could just tap into that. So you've kind of shared with us where you are today. I mean, you're a successful guy, you're well spoken, you run a podcast, you're doing these things to help people, and you're truly transforming mindsets, which is hugely impactful.
Thank you.
What would you tell someone who, if you had to give them kind of a takeaway? They hear our conversation, and there's all different areas that people could fall into, whether they are on that place of ultimate despair, depression, or they're a little bit further along and they're not there, but they're still not happy with their lives. What advice would you give them, or where would you send them to find this self-discovery?
Somebody asked me on a podcast recently, they said, this is hypothetical, obviously. If somebody only had 60 minutes to change their lives, what would you have them do? And I said, I would skip our podcast. I would skip any YouTube video. I would hire a therapist or a counselor. That's what I would do, because you don't need motivation necessarily. You probably need self-awareness of why you are where you are today. And it's not what you did yesterday. It's what happened to you when you're younger, most likely. It's the stuff that we don't look at. I would say that I am a huge advocate for therapy and counseling, because I think it's going to be, is it going to be uncomfortable? Absolutely. But is it going to be worth it? I have that belief. So that is one thing I would give. That is one thing I would say. And then something that really, really has helped me, I always say identify your mud. All I mean by that is this. I left my job, which was dead grass, right, in this analogy, but I didn't go to green grass where we are today. I just went through the mud for a long, long, long period of time. I think a lot of us, we don't jump because we say, I don't want to go from dead grass to dead grass. Everything's dead grass in the beginning. And the things that aren't serving us end up as dead grass in the end. So in the middle, there's mud. I think that's just the way it is. You're most likely not going to go from the worst thing to the best thing, but you can go from the worst thing to fulfillment and then figure out how to make that the best thing eventually. Just identify your mud and just understand what comes with it. I don't ever advise somebody does what I do, where you leave your job and just go all in, because my mud was different than yours. But your mud might be staying in a job that doesn't fulfill you for the next year, so you can do what does fulfill you in the weekend and transition that way. It's just different mud. I think we all have mud, and when you become familiar with it, you identify it, then at least you understand it. That's advice I would give to anybody, because I think it's just, there's a lot of stuff out there that's like, it's all going to work out and you're in the right place at the right time. Maybe you're in a place and maybe you didn't choose it, or maybe you don't want to be there. Maybe you don't know how to get out, but all of us are going to find mud. I believe that at a deep level. So yeah, that is the advice. Seek therapy, seek counseling, surround yourself with people who make you feel good and you trust, and identify your mud.
I love that analogy. I really do. I've never heard that before, but it's so true.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And, that process too, just knowing that there is growth in that process. You're not going to go through mud and get dirty. And I heard this, it reminds me of this analogy I heard where, you plant a seed, it's not going to grow unless it's thrown in the mud and the dirt. So it's almost like you have to get dirt on you in order to grow. And that is the beauty of life, but it's the challenge as well, trying to find out where to go, how to navigate through that. But it is a journey of self-discovery, and I think your advice is spot on. Do you have any closing thoughts before we kind of wrap up? Anything else you'd like to leave our audience with?
I usually leave, and again, it's kind of open-ended, but I usually leave with two quotes. Well, one quote and one question. First quote, from day to day, progress is invisible. From year to year, progress is impossible to miss. It's probably not going to seem like you're crushing it right now, but if you find contrast and perspective and look back a year, if you've made a lot of progress, you're going to notice. If you haven't made a lot of progress, you're going to you're really going to notice. If you've gone in the opposite direction, you're really, really going to notice. But it doesn't serve you to not know. So that's one. And then one of my favorite questions in the world, changed my life. Are the people in your life the best from your past or the best for your future? A lot of people in our lives are because they've always been there. We used to party. We used to work out together. We used to whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you're going to be doing forever. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be serving you forever. So a powerful question. It can be painful. I do think it's worth asking just because that is one of the biggest things I've seen. A lot of people have people around them who are holding them back intentionally or unintentionally because they're afraid to be left behind. So yeah, those are the two.
I love it. This has been awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you. You have so much wisdom and insight. And, I really think you bring a ton of value when you come and share these things. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I appreciate all your kind words. You have been extremely complimentative. That is a tough word. So yeah, I appreciate it very much. I'm very grateful to have got to meet you and share this time with you.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.